My brother Wade sent off for a quiet wife the spring I turned 19, and the woman who stepped down off the Tyndall stage that afternoon like to have ended him before she ever learned his name. I was there to see it, which is the only reason I can tell it true. Wade had hauled me along to handle the team while he stood at the depot rail in his one good shirt, hat in his two hands like a boy at church, watching the road up from the Greywater crossing for the dust that meant the stage. He had read the matchmaker's letter so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. A widow lady back in St. Joseph, Mrs. Prout, ran the arrangements, and she had written that the bride coming west to Cedar Gap was a gentle, biddable Christian woman of sound health and quiet temper, suited to a working home and the care of a child. Wade had said that word, biddable, like it was the finest thing a man could ask for. He had a notion in his head of a soft, agreeable creature who would keep the house warm and never argue, and he had bought the notion whole. I have thought, in all the long years since, that the Lord must have laughed clear out loud at my brother that day. The stage came in late and coated gray to the wheel hubs, the horses lathered and blowing, and the driver, a man named Hollis Tyndall, no kin to us despite the name, was cussing something low and steady as he hauled the brake. There had been trouble on the road. You could see it in the team. The offside wheeler was favoring a foreleg and rolling its eye, and the whole hitch was strung tight as fence wire. And before the dust had even settled, before Wade could step forward with his hat and his speech, the coach door banged open, and a woman climbed down without waiting for the step to be set, and walked straight past my brother like he was a hitching post, and went to the head of that lame horse. She was not soft. That was the first thing. She was tall for a woman, with a strong, plain face gone brown at the cheekbones from a week of open windows, and she had her sleeves shoved up past the elbow before she reached the team. Her traveling dress was good cloth but plainly cut and plainly mended, and she had a man's way of moving that wasted nothing. She got a hand on the wheeler's halter and laid her other palm flat along its neck and said something to it none of us could hear, and the horse, which had been about to come apart, went still. "This animal's been overdriven on a stone bruise," she said to nobody, to all of us. "There's a rock packed up under the shoe near side, and you've run it 20 miles on it. You're lucky it didn't go lame for good." She lifted the hoof clean and easy, the way you'd lift a sleeping cat, and she dug at the frog with a hoof pick she produced from somewhere in her own skirts, her own pick, mind, that she traveled with, and out came a flat gray stone the size of a $50. She let the hoof down and straightened and looked the driver dead in the eye. "You owe this horse better than that," she said. Tyndall, the driver, who had driven that road 11 years and never once been schooled at his own depot, opened his mouth and shut it again. And Wade, my brother Wade, who had stood there the whole while with his speech dying in his throat, finally got out, "You'd be Miss Doane, then." She turned and looked at him, looked at the good shirt and the hat in his hands and the speech all over his face, and something went across her own face that I would not understand for months, that was not unkindness but was certainly not biddable. "I would," she said, "and you'd be the man who advertised for a wife and a hired girl in the same breath and didn't know it." She put her hand out to shake, plain as a man. "Junella Doane. Folks call me Nell. You can call me Nell or you can call me Miss Doane, but I'd thank you not to call me biddable, for I never have been and I'm too old to start." Wade looked at her hand a long moment like it might bite. Then he took it, and I swear to you, watching from up on the box with the lines in my fist, I saw my brother, who had buried a sister and a mother and the better part of his own heart, who had not laughed out loud in 3 years. I saw something wake up behind his eyes that he had thought was dead and gone. He didn't know it yet, but I saw it. That is how Nell Doane came to the Bitter Creek. And if you are waiting for me to tell you she was a poor helpless thing and my brother her rescuer, you have got the whole of it backward, and you may as well go on and find another story. Because the truth, the way it happened, is that my brother sent away for a woman he could manage, and the Lord sent him an equal instead. And the saving of us all came not from his hand reaching down, but from hers reaching out level, to a man too proud and too hurt to take it. Let me tell it the way it went. You have to understand what the Bitter Creek was that spring to understand what she walked into. It was 4 sections of hard grass and harder luck up under the saddleback, with the gray water running thin along the south line and a deal more rock than a man would want. Our daddy had broke it out of nothing and broke his health doing it, and he was 3 years in the ground by then. Our mother had followed him inside a 12-month, the way some long-married people do, as if they cannot make sense of the world separate. And our sister Mara had gone the spring before Nell came, of a fever that took her in 9 days, and left behind a boy of 7 named Tom and a no-account husband who lit out for the gold fields inside a month and never wrote. So it was Wade and me and the boy. I was near grown and no help in a house. Wade was 31 and looked 40, and he was raising that child the only way a grieving man alone knows how, which is to say badly, with too much silence and not enough supper. Tom had gone wild and quiet at the same time, the way a hurt child will. He had stopped talking much. He slept with his dead mother's shawl and would let no one touch it. And Wade, who loved that boy past all telling and could not say so, had finally done the one thing his pride would let him do, which was the practical thing, the thing a rancher does. He advertised for a wife to make a home, the way you'd advertise for a cook or a hand, because he could not bear to call it what it was, which was a man drowning and putting up a flag. He wanted biddable because biddable was safe. Biddable would not ask him how he felt. Biddable would keep the corners swept and the boy fed and would not look too hard at the broke-down places in a man. Instead he got Nell, who looked at every broke-down place there was and named it out loud. The ride out to the spread that first afternoon was about as comfortable as sitting on a hot stove. Nell rode up on the box with me because she said she'd had her fill of the inside of that coach and would as soon see the country, and Wade rode his bay alongside, and the two of them said maybe a dozen words the whole 12 miles, and most of those were sharp. She asked him how many head he ran, and he told her, and she said it was a thin showing for 4 sections, and he went stiff as a froze rope, and said the grass had been poor 2 years running, and she said grass was poor for the man who didn't move his stock and good for the man who did, and Wade did not answer that at all, which is how I knew it had stung, because a thing that's wrong you argue, and a thing that's true you go quiet on. We came up over the last rise with the sun going low and gold across Camas Flat, and the house standing there gray and unpainted with the barn behind it and the corrals, and Nell looked at it a long while. I braced for her to say something cutting about the unpainted boards or the sag in the barn roof or the general air of a place where the women had all died. But she didn't. She looked at it the way you'd look at a horse with good bone gone poor on bad feed, seeing what it was under what it had become. "There's a good place buried in there," she said, soft, almost to herself. And then, before Wade could decide whether to be insulted, the front door opened a crack and a boy's face showed in it, pale and wary, and was gone. Nell went still. "That'll be Tom," I said. "That'll be Tom," she agreed. And she did not gush, and she did not coo, and she did not do one single thing a soft Eastern lady would have done. She climbed down off the box and gathered her one carpetbag and her saddle. She had brought her own saddle, a worn old roping saddle that had plainly been a man's, her daddy's I'd learn, and she walked up to that cracked door and crouched down on her heels in front of it so her eyes were level with the boys, and she said, "I hear you're the only one on this place knows where anything is. I'm going to need somebody to show me." Because these 2 grown men looked to me like they couldn't find a hen's egg in a henhouse. There was a silence, and then from behind the door, very small, the first whole sentence I had heard out of Tom in a month. "They can't. Uncle Wade burned the beans Tuesday." "I expect he did," said Nell. And the door came open. I want to be honest about how it went, those first weeks, because the easy way to tell it would be to say she charmed us all and the sun came out. It was not like that. It was more like watching 2 strong horses worked in the same harness for the first time, a deal of pinned ears and crowding and snapping before ever they pulled together. Wade had advertised for help and gotten a partner. And a man who has decided he is going to give the orders does not always know what to do with somebody who gives them right back. She had been on the place 4 days when she reorganized the whole tack room without asking, and Wade came in and could not find his own bridle and stood in the doorway swelling up like a toad. And Nell, without turning around from the bench where she was oiling leather, said, "It's on the third peg where a bridle ought to hang instead of on the floor where you had it growing mold. You're welcome." And Wade said it was his tack room, and Nell said it was a disgrace to a good horse, and Wade said he'd run this outfit 11 years, and Nell said, "Then it's had 11 years to get this bad." And Wade walked out and split firewood for 2 hours that did not need splitting. She had been there a week when she went over the ledger. He had not asked her to. He had a notion the books were a man's business, and she had a notion that anybody fool enough to keep books the way Wade kept them needed sense talked into them. And she sat down at the kitchen table one evening with the account book and a stub of pencil and her own way of ciphering, and worked at it past dark by the lamp. And at the end she set the pencil down and said, "Wade Hollies, the Cedar Gap Mercantile has been charging you a year's interest on a debt you settled last fall. And the cattle buyer shorted you $11 on the spring tally, and you have paid out for feed you didn't need because you bought it in a panic in February instead of contracting it cheap in the fall. You are not poor. You are robbed and disorganized, which is a different thing and a curable one." Now a soft man would have thanked her, and a small man would have run her off for it. My brother was neither, though it took him a while to find out which he was. He sat there a long minute with his jaw working, and then he got up and walked outside, and I followed him out because I was 19 and a coward and did not want to be alone in a kitchen with a woman who had just done that. I found Wade out by the corral fence in the dark, with his arms up on the top rail and his head down, and he said, not to me exactly, "She's right, Davy." "I know it," I said. "She's right about every bit of it." He laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "I sent off for a woman to make a home, and she sat down at my table and made me feel a fool inside of a week." He shook his head. "Daddy never would have stood for it." "Daddy," I said, "ran this place into the ground being too proud to take advice, and you know it." Wade was quiet a long while. Up at the house the lamp burned in the kitchen window, and you could see her shadow moving as she worked, never still, banking the fire, setting the room to rights. And after a time my brother said, lo, the truest thing he had said in 3 years. "I don't know how to have somebody be right at me, Davy. I only ever learned how to have 'em wrong." That was the heart of it, you see. Wade was not afraid of a hard woman. He was afraid of needing one. Because everybody he had ever needed had died on him, and a man burned that bad will choose to be alone over being burned again and call it strength. But here is the thing about Nell Doan that took me the longest to understand, that I think Wade understood before I did even while he was fighting it. She was not trying to win. When she set him right about the ledger, she was not crowing. She had no use for a man she could beat. A woman like that, a woman who had spent her whole life being the smartest one in the room and getting nothing for it but men's resentment, does not come west looking for somebody to lord it over. She comes looking for somebody who can stand it. Somebody who can be told the truth and not crumble and not lash out, but plant his feet and tell it back. She had come 2,000 miles, I came to believe, not to be saved and not to be served, but to find one solitary man on this earth who would not flinch when she stood up to her full height. She did not know yet whether Wade was that man, and he did not know whether he could be. The country, meanwhile, did not care a whit about any of it. The country was getting ready to try to kill us all. It came on dry that spring, and then it came on drier. The gray water dropped till you could near walk across it drishshod, and the grass on Camas Flat cured standing and went the color of a lion's hide. Wade rode the lines every day with a face like the weather. We were a cow outfit running on a thin margin in a good year, and this was shaping up to be no good year. And right in the teeth of it, the trouble that had been waiting on us all along came calling, the way trouble does, the minute you're too busy to fight it. His name was Quentin Sloane. He had the anchor outfit east of us, down where the Greywater ran fuller, and he had bought up half the paper in the county, and he wore a town coat to ride in and never got dust on his boots. He had been after the Bitter Creek for 2 years, not the land, particular, but the water rights along our stretch of the Greywater, because whoever held our south line in a dry year held the whole upper valley by the throat. And Sloane had a note. Our daddy had borrowed against the spread in a bad year, and the note had passed hand to hand the way debt does, and it had washed up at last in Quentin Sloane's pocket, and it came due that fall. Sloane rode out to the Bitter Creek the second week of the drought. I remember it because Nell had been there a little over a month by then, and the place had already changed under her hands. The corrals mended, the books squared, the boy talking. A kitchen garden broke out behind the house that she watered by hand from the well morning and night, and shaded with old flower sacking against the killing sun. She was out in that garden in a man's hat against the glare, when Sloane rode up, and he tipped his own hat to her and took her for the hired girl, which was his first mistake, and asked could she fetch the man of the place. "I'll fetch my husband," Nell said, and it was the first time I ever heard her say the word, and I do not believe they were rightly married yet, only stage married and waiting on the circuit preacher, but she said it cool as creek water, and I saw why a half-second later, because Sloane's whole manner changed. He had meant to deal with a desperate widower alone. He had not reckoned on a wife. A wife meant witnesses and arithmetic. Wade came and the 2 men stood out front, and Sloane laid it out smooth as the town coat he wore. The note was his now. It came due in October. He knew times were hard. He was a neighbor and a Christian, and he had no wish to see a family put off their land. So he would make Wade an offer of friendship. Wade would sign over the water rights along the south line, just the water, mind, Wade could keep ranching, and Sloane would tear the note clean up and call the debt square. A man could not ask fairer than that in a dry year. Sloane smiled when he said it. And Wade, I watched my brother's face, and I watched the trap close in his eyes because he could not see a way out. October was coming. The cattle were thinning on cured grass. He had no money to pay the note and no way to make any in a drought. And here was a man offering to make it all go away for nothing but a few yards of riverbank. I saw Wade's shoulders start to come down. I saw him start to nod. And Nell said, "What's the face of the note, Mr. Sloane?" Sloane turned to her, still smiling, the way a man smiles at a woman who has wandered into men's business. "Now, ma'am, this is." "The face of the note," Nell said again, and she had set down her watering can, and she had the man's hat pushed back off her brown forehead, and there was nothing soft in her at all. "The principal. The number Daddy Holly's borrowed. You're standing on my husband's ground asking him to sign away the one thing in this valley worth having, and I'd like to know against what. So, the face of the note." Sloane told her. He had to, there were witnesses. He named a figure. And the interest writ into it. He named the rate. It was a hard rate, a panicure rate. But it was the next part that mattered, and Nell had it before any of us, because Nell had spent that whole month over the books, and Nell could cipher in her head faster than most men could on paper. "And by my arithmetic," she said, "this note is worth a deal less than that riverbank, and you know it, and you're hopping a tired man in a dry year won't stop to figure it. The water along our south line waters your whole upper range. There's not a number on God's earth you could write on a note that'd be worth what that water's worth to the anchor, and you're trying to get it for the price of a bad debt." She picked her watering can back up, calm as Sunday. "We'll pay the note, Mr. Sloane, in October, in full. And you can keep your friendship, for I've seen the make of it." There was a silence you could have stood a spoon up in. Now here is what I want you to understand, because it is the whole turn of the thing. When Nell said we'll pay the note in full, she did not have the first notion how. There was no money. The drought was on. She had no more idea than Wade did where $200 and odd was coming from by October. She bought us nothing that day but time and dignity. She shut the trap before it closed on Wade's leg, and she did it on pure nerve, and she walked back to her garden after and watered her squash with her hands shaking. And I am the only one who saw that, because I had followed her round the corner of the house. "You don't know how we'll pay it," I said to her low. She did not look up from the watering. "No," she said, "I don't." "Then why'd you?" "Because a man who will take the water for the debt," she said, "has already decided what the water's worth, and it's a sight more than the debt. He didn't come to settle. He came to steal cheap. And I'll be hanged, Davy Hollies, before I let your brother get robbed twice in one lifetime by men too smooth to argue with." She straightened up and wiped her face with her sleeve and looked at me. And there were two things in that look. There was fear, real fear, because she had just made a bill our whole future could not pay. And there was something fierce and bright underneath it that I have spent my life trying to find a word for and never quite have. "He'll thank me or he'll throw me off the place," she said. "Either way, it'll be the truth between us, which is more than that man was offering." Wade did not throw her off the place. Wade came and found her at the garden an hour later, after he'd had time to do the arithmetic himself and find she was right to the penny. And he stood at the edge of the rows with his hat off. And he said, and these are his exact words, "I have kept them 40 years. Where the horse trader's daughter learned to figure a note like a banker." "My daddy," said Nell, not turning round, still pulling weeds. "He traded horses to every sharp man between the Missouri and the mountains, and he taught me the only way a girl child gets traded fair is to be the one doing the figuring. I've been figured at by smiling men my whole life, Wade Hollies. I know one when he tips his hat. And then, because she could not help herself, you were going to sign it." "I was," Wade said. "Then you owe me your river." A long beat. And then my brother, my hard, silent brother, did a thing I had not seen him do in 3 years. He laughed. It came out of him rough and surprised, like it hurt, like a wheel that hadn't turned in too long, and he said, "I reckon I do it that." That was the first crack in the wall. After that the wall came down by inches. Because once a man stops fighting a thing and starts working alongside it, he finds out fast whether the thing is worth working with. And the drought, which was bent on killing us, was the very thing that showed Wade what he had. You cannot hide what you are made of in a dry year. The country strips you down to it. Nell could work. Lord, she could work. She was up before the men and down after, and she did not do woman's chores or man's chores. She did the chore that needed doing, which on a dying outfit in a drought meant she was as like to be horseback hazing thirsty cattle to the last good water as she was to be at the stove. She knew stock. She had the touch, the thing you cannot teach, the thing my daddy had and Wade had, and that you cannot buy nor fake. When the bloody murrain, the bloat, the red water, whatever sickness it was, we never had a name for it, got into the weak cattle along the river bottoms. It was Nell who knew it for what it was, and Nell who knew the doozing, who had us moving the sick stock off the bad bottomland water onto the high seeps before Wade had even named the trouble. And we lost a dozen head where another outfit lost half their herd. And she could ride. I have to say it plain because it was the thing that undid Wade more than the ledgers and the note, and all the rest of it put together. My brother was as good a hand horseback as there was in that country, and proud of it the way a man's proud of the one thing nobody can argue. And the first time he saw Nell take a green colt nobody else could get a saddle near. A snorty 3-year-old daddy had bred and Wade had near given up on, and gentle it across an afternoon with nothing but patience and a quiet voice and a way of asking instead of telling, and ride it out across Camas Flat at a long, easy lope, while it carried her like it had been waiting all its life for somebody to ask it nice. When Wade saw that, he sat his own horse at the corral and watched. And he did not say one word, and his face did a thing I had never seen it do, which was open. She came back and stepped down and looked at him, ready for him to say something small. Men always said something small, and Wade said, quiet, almost shy, a 31-year-old man gone shy as a courting boy, "That's the prettiest piece of horsemanship I ever saw in my life." And Nell, who had been braced for him to take it from her the way men always took things from her, did not know what to do with being given something instead. She stood there with the colt's reins in her hand and the wind moving the grass, and she said, after a moment, careful, like she was setting her weight on ice. My daddy used to say the same. Your daddy, Wade said, raised one hell of a horsewoman. He raised, Nell said, a daughter he couldn't marry off because no man in 3 territories would take a wife who could best him at the one thing he was sure of. She said it light. She meant it heavy. I stopped trying to be less after a while. It cost me, but I stopped. Wade looked at her a long moment across the corral, and he said, don't you ever be less. Not on this place, not for me. And then, because it was more than he knew how to carry, he turned and went to the barn, and Nell stood there in the wind a good while after, and I, watching from the loft like the spy I was at 19, saw her put her face down against the colt's warm neck and stand like that, hidden, for the length of time it takes a hard person to put their face back to rights. I have wondered since whether that was the moment she decided to stay. Because I should tell you, and this is the part that matters most for the truth of it, Nell could have left, the whole while. She was no captive and no charity case and no destitute thing with nowhere to go. She had a little money of her own, saved out and sewn into her hems, enough for a stage ticket and a fresh start somewhere. I knew it because Tom told me, having watched her count it once. She had skills that would have earned her a living in any horse town between there and the coast. The marriage was not yet made by any preacher. She had stepped off that stage owing my brother nothing, and at any time those first months she could have figured the Bitter Creek for the losing proposition it surely looked to be, a busted outfit, a hard man, a debt that would sink us all in October, and climbed back on the eastbound coach, and not a soul could have stopped her. She stayed, and she stayed before there was any reason to think we'd win. She stayed when the smart money was on Sloan and the drought. That is a thing I want set down plain, because the easy story is the one where the man saves the woman, and the true story of my brother's life is that the woman looked at a sinking man with clear eyes and decided he was worth going down with, and then, being Nell, decided they were neither one of them going down at all, and set about making it so. The boy decided it before either of them, of course. Children are quicker than grown people. They have to be. Tom had taken to following Nell like a colt follows the lead mare, and somewhere in there he stopped sleeping with his dead mother's shawl clutched in his fist all night, and started leaving it folded on the chair, which I do not think anybody noticed but me and Nell. And one evening at supper Tom asked Nell if he could call her something other than Miss Doane, because Miss Doane was a long thing to say, and the table went still, and Wade put his fork down. And Nell, and this is the measure of her, this is the whole of her in one breath. Nell did not grab at it. A grasping woman would have said, yes, call me mama, and made the boy a thing she'd won. Nell said, you can call me Nell, same as everybody. Your mama was your mama, Tom, and she still is, and nobody's taking her place, not me nor anybody. But I'll tell you what. And she leaned her elbows on the table and looked at that boy serious as a judge. I knew a woman once back home, raised 3 young uns that weren't her own blood, and they called her their second mother. Said a body's lucky to get one good mother in this life, and luckier still to get 2. So if it ever sits right with you, no hurry, no pushing, you might could think of me like that. A second one, the extra lucky kind. Tom thought about it the way 7-year-olds think, with his whole face. And then he went back to his beans. But about a week later, out of nowhere in the barn, he handed Nell a curry comb and said, here, second mother, the bay's got cockleburs. Like it was the plainest thing in the world. And Nell took that comb and turned around quick to the bay's far side, and I happened to be there, and I saw she'd turned so the boy wouldn't see her cry. So that was where we stood, come the worst of it. The drought had us by the throat. The note came due in October. We had a hard man and a hard woman who had quit fighting each other and started, careful and clumsy and late, to fall in love, though neither one of them would have said the word at gunpoint. And we had no earthly idea how we were going to find the money to pay Quentin Sloan and keep the river. It was Nell who found the way. Of course it was. She had been worrying at it the whole summer, I knew, because I'd see the lamp burning late in the kitchen and her over the books, not the ranch books now but figures of her own, working at something. And one night in late August she laid it out at the supper table the way a general lays out a battle. We can't make the note off the cattle, she said. Not in this drought. Sell now and we sell into a glutted market at a robbery price, same as every other outfit dumping thirsty stock. That's what Sloan's counting on, that we'll panic sell cheap and still come up short, and then he's got us. She tapped the table. But Sloan's made one mistake, and it's the same mistake he made the day he rode out here. He thinks the only thing worth $1 on this place is the grass and the river. He never looked at the horses. Wade frowned. We run maybe 40 head of saddle stock. They're good, but... They're better than good, Nell said. Your daddy bred a line of mountain horses on this place that'll go all day on bad water and rough country, and they're worth 3 times a flatland horse to any outfit that works real mountains. And there's a cavalry remount buyer comes through Cedar Gap every fall, government contract, pays cash, hard cash, top dollar, for sound horses that can take altitude and country. Your daddy sold to him for years. You stopped after because you couldn't bear to part with the colts. She said it gentle because it was a grief thing, the horses being the last of their daddy. Wade, we've got 40 head of the best mountain horses in this county and a man coming through in 6 weeks with a fistful of government cash, and we've been letting them eat grass we can't spare while we starve over a debt we could clear with a dozen of them. We don't have to sell the river. We never did. We just had to look at what we actually had instead of what we were afraid to lose. There was a quiet at that table. You could have heard a star fall through. And Wade said slow, Daddy's horses. Daddy's horses, Nell said, would rather earn this family's freedom than stand in a corral being mourned. That's what horses are for. And we keep the breeding stock and the best of the colts and we sell the rest. And next spring there's more because that's what a breeding line is. It's not a thing you lose. It's a thing you make again. She reached across the table then, which she had never done, and put her hand over my brother's big rough hand where it lay on the boards. We don't sell the river, Wade. We don't sell 1 yard of ground your daddy bled for. We sell some horses and we pay that smiling man his money to the penny, and we watch his face when we do it. And then this place is yours, free and clear, and nobody, not him, not the bank, not the drought, nobody owns 1 stick of it but you. Wade looked down at her hand on his. He did not pull away. He turned his hand over slow under hers until they were palm to palm, and he said, rough hours. What? You said it'd be mine, free and clear. My brother lifted his eyes to her face. It'd be ours if you'll have it. If you'll have me, not the hired girl arrangement, not the matchmaker's lie, the real thing, the staying thing, you and me and the boy. I sent off for somebody to manage, and the Lord sent me somebody I'd be a fool to want to. I'm no good at the saying part, but I'd be asking you, Nell, proper, to stay because you choose to, not because you're caught. And Nell Doan, who had crossed 2,000 miles looking for one man who wouldn't flinch when she stood to her full height, looked at the one she'd found, holding her hand level across his daddy's kitchen table, and she said, I figured the note in my head the day I stepped off that stage, Wade. And I figured you about the same time. I just didn't trust either some till I'd watched it prove out. Her voice was not steady. Hers never was underneath for all her nerve. I'll have you. I chose this place the day I saw there was a good outfit buried in it. I chose you the day you told me not to be less. I've just been waiting on you to choose me back with your eyes open. I left the room then. A man's 19 and there's some things he oughtn't watch. And the way my brother and that woman looked at each other across the table was one of them. I went out and stood under the dry stars with the drought wind moving over the dead grass, and I'll tell you, I was happy, and I was something else too, something a younger brother feels watching his elder come back to life. A kind of ache that the world could mend a man after all, that it was possible, that grief was not the last word. I hadn't been sure. After Mara, after mother, after daddy, I had near decided the Hollises were a snake-bit family the Lord had quit on. Standing out there that night, I commenced to think maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd just been waiting to send the right woman down off the Tyndall stage, and had to wait till my brother was beaten down low enough to take her. They were married 3 weeks later, when the circuit preacher came through, in the front room with the windows open and the whole of Camas flat gone gold in the evening. And Tom stood up between them holding the ring on his open palm. and called Nell his second mother out loud in front of God and the preacher and everybody, and there was not a dry eye in that room, mine least of all. And then there was the matter of Quentin Sloan. The remount buyer came through Cedar Gap the second week of October, just as Nell had said, with a government contract and a leather satchel of hard cash. And he knew the Hollies line of old and was glad to see it back on the market. And he went through our cull horses with his hands and his eyes the way a horseman does, and he paid top dollar, cash, for 15 head sound mountain horses that carry a soldier up any grade in the territory. And we kept the breeding stock and the best colts and the green 3-year-old Nell had gentled, which Wade told the buyer flat was not for sale at any price. And the buyer looked at the way that colt followed Nell around the corral and said he didn't doubt it. The note came due the following day. Sloan had set the place of payment at the Cedar Gap Bank on a Saturday at noon in front of the whole town, and I understood later he'd done it a purpose, to shame us, figuring we'd have to come in hat in hand and beg more time or sign the water away in public. And he wanted witnesses to the Hollises going under so the whole valley would know who held the upper Graywater after. He miscalculated, the way smooth men do, because he could not imagine being beaten by people he decided were beneath him. We rode in, all 4 of us, Wade and Nell and Tom and me, and the town was thick on the boardwalks, the way a town is on a Saturday, and word had gone round, the way it does, that the Hollies outfit was going to lose the river at noon. Sloan was already there at the bank in his town coat with the note in his hand and 2 of his men behind him, and a smile on his face wide enough to swallow a fence post. He saw us coming, and the smile got wider. "Hollies," he said loud for the boardwalk, "I'm a fair man. It's not too late to take the friendly terms, sign over the South Water and walk away clean. A man's got to know when he's beat." And my brother who 11 years had let smooth men talk circles round him, who'd been about to sign that very water away on his own front porch in July, my brother walked up to Quentin Sloan in front of the whole town of Cedar Gap and said, "A man does have to know when he's beat, Sloan, and you don't." And Nell stepped up beside him level, the way she'd been from the first, and she set down on the bank's counter a canvas sack, and she said to the banker, clear and carrying so the whole boardwalk heard every word, "Mr. Pell, I'd be obliged if you'd count this in front of these witnesses. It's the face of the Hollies note and every penny of the interest writ into it, to the day, which I've figured twice and stand behind. Count it, mark the note paid in full, and hand it across, and I'll thank Mr. Sloan to put his signature on the discharge before all these good people, so there's no question ever of this debt being sold or claimed or smiled at again." You could have heard a pin drop on that boardwalk. The banker counted it. It took a while. It was a deal of money in small bills and gold. And the whole time Quentin Sloan's face did the thing Nell had promised, months before in her garden, that it would do. It came apart slow from the smile down, as the count went on and did not come up short because she had figured it twice and she was Nell Doan and she did not come up short. And when the banker said, "It's all here, Sloan, every cent," the notes discharged, and pushed the paper across for Sloan to sign, that smooth man stood there with the pen in his hand, and the whole town watching, and could not for a long moment make himself write his name on his own defeat. He signed. He had to. There were witnesses and arithmetic and a woman in a man's hat standing level beside a hard man, and there was not one thing in the world his smile could do about any of it. Wade took the discharged note and the paid-up deed, and he folded them careful and put them inside his coat against his heart, and then he turned to the whole boardwalk of Cedar Gap and said, not loud, he never was loud, "The Bitter Creek's free and clear. Has been since noon. Anybody wants to do honest business with the Hollies outfit, our door's open. Anybody wants to do the other kind," and he looked at Sloan, just looked at him, "our door's that too, and you've seen now what comes through it." And then we went home. That's most of it. That's the shape of the thing. There's no shooting in it, you'll notice. I've heard men tell stories of that country that are all powder, smoke, and graves, and there was plenty of that to be had if you went looking. But the bitter creek never lost the river to a gun. It got saved by a woman who could figure a note in her head and gentle a colt and stand level beside a beaten man until he remembered how to stand up. The drought broke that November, the way droughts do, all at once in 3 days of rain that turned the gray water loud again, and the grass came back green in the spring over Camas Flat, and the Holly's horses came back too, more of them every year, because a breeding line is not a thing you lose but a thing you make again. Nell was right about that, as she was right about most things, which my brother learned to say out loud in time, which is the rarest thing of all in a proud man. They had near 30 years together on that place. They had 2 more children after Tom, a girl Nell named Mara, for the sister, which set Wade to leave the room and be a while coming back, and a boy they named for our daddy. Tom grew up and married and took over the upper section, and he called Nell his second mother to the day she died, and meant it more every year. The unpainted house got painted white, with a porch Wade built her with his own hands the summer after the drought, because she'd said once, that first evening up on the box, that there was a good place buried in there, and he'd spent the rest of his life digging it out for her to prove she'd been right to see it. I'm an old man now, older than Wade ever got to be, and I've outlived most everybody in this telling. But I think on that spring more than near anything. I think on my brother standing at the depot rail with his hat in his hands and a head full of the word biddable, waiting on a soft creature he could manage, and on what came down off that stage instead, sleeves shoved up, walking past him to a herding horse without a glance, telling a stranger to his face that he owed an animal better. I think the Lord knew exactly what he was doing. Wade didn't need a woman he could manage. A man who's lost everybody he ever needed and walled himself off behind being right. That man doesn't need somebody soft to lean on the wall. He needs somebody strong enough to knock it down. He needs an equal who will stand square in front of him and tell him the truth and not flinch and not fold, and love him not in spite of his hardness, but right through the middle of it, until the hard parts got no place left to hide. Wade sent off for somebody less than him to keep him safe, and the great good fortune of my brother's life, the saving of the ranch and the boy and the man himself, was that he got somebody who was every inch his match and had the wit to know it and the courage in the end to be glad. I stood up best man at their wedding, with the windows open and the gold light coming across the flat. And when the preacher got to the part about for richer for poorer, in plenty and in want, I watched Nell take my brother's 2 big rough hands in her 2 strong brown ones level, the way she'd shaken his hand off the stage that first day, and I saw she was not the least bit afraid of the want, having figured it already and found it could be beat. And I saw that Wade, for the first time in the years I'd known him, was not the least bit afraid of the love. A body's lucky, Nell used to say, to get one good thing in this life. Luckier still to get 2. My brother got the both, the same afternoon off the noon stage, and spent 30 years thanking heaven he'd been too proud to know what he was asking for, and too beaten down at last to turn it away when it came.